Perfect. Looks like we're good to go and we're ready to start. I will just double check and make sure that's the case. Looks like we have some participants in there already, so I will get this kicked off then, everyone. Thanks everyone for making the time for joining us today. I wanted to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on. So for me, it's the Wulgurukaba and Bindal people. And we acknowledge all of the elders past, present, and emerging. So I'll just start with, my name's James. I'm from Out for Australia. So we're a national organisation dedicated to creating an Australia where everyone is comfortable being their authentic self out in the workplace. And this afternoon, we're joined by, we've got Colin Edwards, Siobhan Nella, and we have Senator Nita Green. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Perfect. So what I wanted to start with, my pronouns are he, him. Colin, what are your pronouns, if you don't mind me asking?
He, him's fine, but I've been called everything, so that's okay.
Perfect. Siobhan, what are your preferred pronouns?
She, her.
Perfect. And Nita?
She and her, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, guys. So this afternoon, we wanted to kind of discuss a little bit about region Australia and what it's like for queer people living in the regions. So I thought we'd come together. You guys are a fantastic cross-section of exactly that. So if maybe we could talk a little bit to each and every one of you about, we'll start with Colin. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do, and where you live.
All right, we'll start from the background probably. I'm from Townsville in North Queensland, so I'm in the tropics. Townsville is a population of about 220,000, so I suppose it's a great microcosm of regional Australia. We support a large rural community, and we do so proudly. And it's also interesting to note that Townsville is just as far from Brisbane as Brisbane is from Melbourne, to give you an idea of distance. I'm a small business person. At the age of 22, I opened a small business in Townsville, and I've just gone past my 35th year.
Congratulations. Fantastic. Good work.
What else can I tell you? I'm single, unlike the rest of the panel, and I've got to congratulate you all. You're all newly married. So congratulations to everybody. Some people are still fresh back from honeymoon, so I think that's exciting. So being the only single solo person still at the age of 57 means that my opportunities are somewhat diminishing, but I'm really proud. I'm really proud of all the rest of the panel, and congratulations. Making relationships work wherever you are is a very difficult thing, so well done.
Thank you very much, Colin. Definitely.
Thank
we
you.
all appreciate it. Siobhan, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Siobhan. I am a production support metallurgist for the copper solvent extraction and electrowinning plants at Olympic Dam, which is 560 kilometres north of Adelaide, which is a bit of a mouthful, but ultimately I'm a chemical engineer who specialises in turning metal from acidic water into sheets like a copper farmer. So I guess I too could be a rural support agent, just of the metal kind, more than the crop kind. So that's, then used to transfer into our phones, electric cars, the gas piping that comes into your house. So we're quite an important asset, I suppose, to the scheme of things. Yeah. So in the theme of today, I was obviously invited to talk, as I've spent close to 3 years now living in the remote town of Roxby Downs. So unlike Colin's population, we about a small population, about 4,000 in town, of which 2,500 is in fly-in, fly-out camps. So a bit smaller scale, but just as powerful nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so 2.5 years of that time I've spent living here has been with my now lovely wife of 10 days. And I think that's the first time I've been able to say that out loud. So it's a bit exciting.
The
Very
novelty
satisfying.
never wears off, I promise.
But
No,
yeah,
thank you very
that's
much
me.
for that. And it's really cool because especially having such a large transient population makes it a very unique kind of rural setting as well. So it's a
Yeah,
little bit
100%.
different from everyone else's. So yeah, absolutely. Nita, did you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you do, please?
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. My name's Nita. I'm a senator for Queensland, and I was elected last year at the last election. This is the first time I've ever got involved in politics, run for to be a politician. But essentially, before I was a politician, I was a campaigner, and I worked on campaigns ranging from social justice issues, union campaigns. I'm heavily involved in the union movement, and that led me to working on the equality campaign for marriage equality. And I have to say, people sometimes say, oh, what made you put your hand up for politics? And I think it was sitting around and seeing politicians do what I think was a pretty bad job of something that should have been pretty easy. And I thought to myself, maybe we just need a few different voices in the Senate. So I'm a member of the Labor Party, a proud member of the Labor Party, put my hand up to be selected and was really lucky to be elected at the last election. I live in Cairns. I've lived here for 2 years, beautiful tropical Cairns, just up the road from Colin. And Cairns is a really, diverse and transient type of rural setting. We've got lots of different people, and we're actually this month celebrating Cairns Pride. So even COVID has not stopped Cairns Pride. So there are some challenges with living in a place in a rural setting, but I have to say, in terms of, from a Queensland perspective, sometimes it feels like Cairns is another suburb of New Farm, just down the road. But distance, I think, is what Colin pointed out. For a geographical fact for you is that, I think Cairns is closer to PNG than it is to Brisbane.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
No, it absolutely is.
Yeah, so Queensland is a big state, and I think that's actually something really unique about our regions.
In fact, I think the closest capital city to Cairns is actually Dili. So I think it's closer than Darwin. So yeah. People don't realise the distances of this country. I think especially when you're gay and you decide where you want to call home, it makes a huge difference to what type of lifestyle you're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why I kind of wanted to discuss this, because especially when I was growing up, 20 years ago, it was very, very common I grew up in a small country town near Bundaberg. It was called Gin. It has a tiny population, I'm talking like 2,000 or 3,000. And it was rural, like very much so. Like the town it's a town on a highway. It's a one street town, very much so. And it was, growing up there, I couldn't wait to get out of there. And it was very, very common, like especially any kind of queer kids, we were very much so, let's go to the big city because that's where we'll get to meet other people. And it wasn't until later in life when I moved up into Townsville that I realized that, there are other options here. You don't have to go to, Brisbane or Sydney. There are vibrant, thriving communities all over Australia that are not necessarily the capital cities.
Being in Townsville for 35 years, when I decided to come to Townsville to open the business, I came up by myself. I'd never been to Townsville before. We're talking 1985. Queensland was run by a corrupt government. Joh Bjelke-Petersen was still in power. Queensland was viewed as an extremely conservative state. Discussions about homosexuality just weren't on. people may remember a story of Bob Catter way back then, challenging that if there were more than 6 homosexuals living on properties in rural Queensland, that he'd walk backwards to Burke. Well, I held a press conference, got a couple of dozen of my friends who worked on farms and properties, and I'm still waiting for that beer, you know. So at the end of the day, it was a shock when I came here, and over the 35 years that I've been here, I've seen lots of young people growing up, coming out, fleeing the city for the big smoke, the urban ghettos of sociality, sex, contact. But then as the years wear on, most of them end up coming back. There's something that draws them back when they realize the importance of what's relevant to them with life, you know. I find that fleeing regional and rural areas is really common, but I've also seen many people over time come back, and that's a really positive thing too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely, and that's an experience that I definitely echo as well. Like that, I've had a lot of friends that have left the regions, tried it out, and then come back again to be like, actually, home is where the heart is. Like, I understand why it is. I think it's a fantastic idea for people to get an experience and go out and see those big cities, but definitely not to forget about where it is that they came from. Siobhan, your town is a little bit different, I guess, because it's like Olympic Dam. It's a work town. Tell us a little bit more about that. Like, do people only specifically come there for the work, and what kind of? Why did you move there originally, I guess?
Yeah, so I mean, so the town was built in the late 80s in order purely to service the mine. So Olympic Dam was owned at the time by Western Mining Company, and they built it from the bottom up. And the town at that point in time had, I think, about 6 streets, all of which were dirt. So since then, we've come a little bit of a way. I've got a Woolies now and a Mitre 10, so look out.
That's it. Not a Bunnings yet?
Nope, no Bunnings, but Mitre 10 has everything, including toilet paper when we didn't have any, so that was important.
Nice.
But so BHP globally have 72,000 employees, and that's all across the world. Whereas here, as I said, Olympic Dam, we got about 4,000 employees, and of that, probably about 65% are fly in, fly out. So you got that 35% that are local. So you got between Roxby Downs, Andamuka, and Woomera, and that's sort of you've got about an hour when you're in Woomera to drive in to work every day and out again. So that's not always the most ideal place to be. But the downfalls, I suppose, of living in a mining town, particularly if you're not working in the mine, is the cost of living is not the cheapest. You forget things like utilities. If something breaks, we have the classic problem of you call a man. Well, there's not really a man in this house. So unless the fish hasn't told me what the fish identifies as yet, but we get sort of a bit stuck in that regard. But what drove me to, I suppose, move here in the first place, at the time when I first got my job, I wasn't offered a fly-in, fly-out position. I was a residential only, which I took with a grain of salt. I had packed up everything. So my whole life went into 4 boxes and my car, and came up here. That I've ridden horses my whole life. So that included leaving my horse behind in Adelaide with my parents, and just kind of washing my hands of everything and going off I go. And that was scary. But this town is such a family and community orientated town that you barely notice it. You know, it may be small, but it's damn mighty. And if you ever need anything, your next door neighbor's right there to help you out. And that, I think that entire community mentality is what has kept me here. And I've watched a couple of my friends now come and go, and I'm still here. And as much as my partner will definitely disagree, we might be here for a little while yet.
But it's good though. It means, like you said, if it's a family and you have that kind of community spirit, it's always great to kind of really involve yourself in that. Is there much of a LGBTQ presence in Roxby Downs?
Not so much in town. So it's driven a lot by site, so with work. So I'm the co-lead for the South Australian chapter of Jasper, which is BHP's LGBT network. And that was started in 2017. So over the last couple of years, when I joined, I think I was member number 7 and member number 2 of the Olympic Dam part. So the other 5 were in Adelaide. And of that network, I checked this afternoon, I'm up to 101 members that I now get to look after, of which 75% are on site.
That's fantastic.
So there's not everyone who's part of the LGBT network is necessarily part of the community. A lot of them are allies, which of course we advocate for. But I have a lot of people that may not necessarily be running, swinging their rainbow flag around. However, they are still slyly part of the community. Definitely not as loud and proud as it probably could be, but it's not a discriminatory place either.
Cool. That's a huge increase in kind of visibility still in that kind of time. So that's amazing. Definitely.
Yeah.
Siobhan, can I ask a question? So you're reasonably young and pretty, as I can see there. So how long have you been at Roxby Downs now?
Just shy of 3 years.
So when you first got there, were there trailblazers that you were made aware of before that had been at Roxby Downs that had perhaps opened the gates and smoothed the road a little bit? Were you made aware that the local community had experience with GLBTI before?
Not necessarily. So a lot of the work came from when I joined Jasper, and it's from the work that we've since sort of drummed up from that. So at the time it was very hush hush, nothing was really said. But having said that as well, BHP as an entity was not super comfortable and out of the closet yet. So it wasn't until mid 2019 that BHP actually started promoting Jasper on their external website, and basically said, yeah, we're in it for the long run as well. And it was when that happened, the community hub in town took it on, and it's things like your Are You OK Day, your Wellbeing Week, Wear It Purple, they all started getting a bit more momentum off-site as well, so in town, throughout the community hub as well. But prior to that, so prior to the start of 2018, there was not much.
Wow. So as far as trailblazers, I guess you are the trailblazer for that kind of community. So that's fantastic.
I mean,
Thank
you could say that.
My experience is just by standing up in regional and rural communities, you draw a light to yourself. I was interested in Nita's history about deciding to run for the Senate. I ran for state parliament in 1992 and federal parliament in 1998. I wasn't successful in getting elected, but I remember in 92 it was such a huge thing, and especially in a place like Townsville, and for a lot of people, particularly mainstream community, it was their first active experience with members of the GLBTI community, and that bred a whole lot of communication and a public interest, good and bad. I mean, it came with threats and all sorts of things, and you learn to live with that. But where I look about where regional and rural communities are today, those trailblazers that did come before us have made it, I think, a little easier and a little more comfortable for us all to live our lives the way that we want to. I remember the furor when I announced my candidacy in 1992 for state parliament, and because my small business is an adult shop, that was already bad enough, because Joh Bjelke-Petersen was still in power. What interested me the most was the media, the rural and regional media, because their contact with GLBTI issues came from the urban ghettos, the urban gay ghettos of the capital cities. And so when people like me stood up for the first time, they were getting local voices that they could consummate some sort of local relationship with. And that was that was really important. Now, 35 years later, I think a lot of that has had a lot to do with my business success. It's helped me. And whilst back then it was very fearful, today our communities embraced it, you know. Look, the last bastion of gay equality, gay marriage, which was achieved several years ago, that all three of you have now enjoyed. I'm still yet to enjoy, but I'm not young and pretty anymore either. But to give away that solidarity, that what made the magic of the gay community happen and our contact together, we have to sacrifice our solidarity to achieve equality. And in the urban centres, that's not such a big thing, because you have so many choices about the way you can live. In rural and regional Australia, when you take away that solidarity, all for one and one for all, for equality, it does, I think, make people think about loneliness and togetherness and acceptance.
Yeah, it's definitely a different landscape, absolutely. Nita, can you talk a little bit about what Cairns was like when you first came to it, and how that's been, and how it was campaigning openly, as because you were engaged at the time while you were campaigning, were you?
No, so we moved to Cairns about 2 years ago. I lived in lots of places before then, Brisbane and the Gold Coast as well. That was during the campaign. I actually grew up in Western Sydney, and I know that sounds very metro for someone who now lives in Cairns and will never go back from regional Queensland. I absolutely love this place. But actually, when the results came through for marriage equality, Western Sydney is one of the places that strongly voted no. And we had some pockets of that in Queensland as well. But if that gives you an idea, I guess, of some of the things that, you know, the mentality that I was dealing with when I was growing up, I think it's not the same as the isolation that people feel in regional Queensland, because I could always go into the city to go to a club or an event. I always had teams of sporting teams that I could associate with and get involved in. But there certainly wasn't, I guess, an out community in Western Sydney. So coming to Cairns was actually really nice, because all these years later, those trailblazers in places like Cairns have done a lot of really hard work. They've established Cairns Pride, which is one of the events that is taking place this year, and the Cairns community has really gotten around that. So when we were campaigning for marriage equality, I was based in Brisbane, but I was working with all of the teams in different areas. So James, as you know, I was working with you guys in Townsville. We had teams in Toowoomba, teams on the Gold Coast, Bundaberg. I think we even had one in Rockhampton. So my job was essentially to make sure all those teams in all of the regions across Queensland had the resources that they needed, and they knew how to have a conversation with someone about whether they were going to vote yes or not. And that's a pretty scary thing for someone to do in a place like Toowoomba. So it was a real privilege to have that role. But what I kind of learnt in doing that was, when it came to Cairns, we were just like, we'll just let Cairns do Cairns, because they were on top of it. They had been campaigning on this issue for many, many years, long before the idea of a plebiscite had even been thought about. The community itself was very well organised. They did a video you might have seen on the beach, which was, went worldwide, global. So when it came to moving here, we knew that we would be safe, which I think is one of the words that we haven't used yet on this forum, but it's certainly one of the things that we think about more than other people, whether we will be safe in our communities, and whether we would be able to, walk down the street, be open, be ourselves. And Cairns is, a place that is surrounded by a lot of rural areas. Some of the most beautiful places you've ever seen. Tully up in Mareeba Way, the mountains are just gorgeous. They are a little less inclusive, but I don't think it's staying that way. Like, I think you just have to get out and about to meet people and understand that people come here because they love the environment, they love the Daintree, the reef, they love to live on the land and live from the land, and they're not really that concerned about what other people do with their lives.
Yeah.
So we've felt very welcomed, definitely, from the beginning. I had no qualms about my first media interview talking about my wife very proudly, which was very nice. And we feel like we've fit in, and we definitely want to make sure that other people in other communities in regional areas have that same privilege and feel that same way. I mean, there's nothing really worse than thinking that a young LGBTI kid might feel unsafe where they live. So part of being visible in regional Queensland and part of being visible in the Senate is about making sure that those kids know that, you know, it is going to be okay.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure that you find your place or your people, because they are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think tonight was really about as well, is making sure that people understood that there are those role models out there, and it is all about finding them. And like Colin said, he's been doing this he's been a role model in the community for 30 years. And he said it was a light, and then people are attracted to those things. And that's exactly it. That's the same with exactly what you're doing as well, Nita, by being such a visible person who's so open in a job like that. It means that people can go, oh, look, they can shoot for the stars, even living in a regional and rural area. Absolutely.
And I think the word that you use that's really important, of course, is workplace, because people move to regional areas and around the country, you know, a lot of the time for work. And so what Out for Australia does really well, and what Siobhan has talked about, some of the programs that corporate partners do. You know, we might get a bit cross sometimes when they take up space on the float in Mardi Gras, but our corporate partners are doing a good job of making sure that people don't just feel safe in their community, but feel safe in their workplace. That is a right. Everyone has the right to feel safe in their workplace. And that is something that we need to encourage, so that when you move to a place, you know there's a community there for you and there's a safe workplace as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. And it's the kind of thing that I think, yeah, that's exactly what we want to make it, so that people are aware of that kind of option. That because it does seem like lip service sometimes from the big corporations, but with things like Jasper, for example, I mean, they really put that forward as something that they were very open about. I mean, I honestly was quite surprised that they came to the party so late, being early 2019. But the fact that it has so quickly grown already, that's the main. That's exactly what matters. Absolutely.
I think one of the hardest things, particularly from a mining perspective, is if you put it, you know, back a step, the Mining Act up until I think it's 2015, 2016 was still labelled as a 1964 Act. Just to have a real overview of how far back in history the mining industry is. So it's not just from an inclusion perspective, it's from an everything perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. It's one of those backbones of Australian industry but it still very easily gets forgotten. And it has such a huge workforce that it makes sense to have, you know, inclusion for the LGBTQIA+ community. So absolutely. I guess one of the other things I wanted to talk about was, how do you, living regionally or rurally, how do you find queer people in the community? Do you see a representative community? I mean, I live in Townsville, and up until a couple of years ago, we had a gay club, one of the few North Queensland gay clubs. Unfortunately, due to the rise of apps and things like that, it's changed and they've had to close down, which is something that's happened across the field for many clubs, and that's across all over the world, not just North Queensland or Australia. So we have very different, we don't have so much of a physical community like that. How do you guys find queer community where you live? And are you involved in it? Or what's that look like?
Look, I think to tell you a funny story, and I've said this story a lot, especially to mainstream media, Townsville a regional city, it used to amaze me where you could get 6 queens and 4 dykes and give them a corrugated iron cow shed at the local showgrounds. And in 3 days, they would turn that into something fabulous. And from hundreds of miles around, we would have GLBTI people coming in from their workplaces or from their families or their homes, and we would put on a bash on a Friday night that we would talk about for months afterwards. I think regional Australia, when you're GLBTI, it's so much better when you're a big fish in a little pond. Otherwise, unlike the capital cities where you're a little fish in a big pond. I remember when I joined the Navy when I was 15, and of course I was then down in the capital cities, and that was back before homosexuality was allowed or legalised. And I would sneak out at the age of 18 to the gay clubs in Sydney, and I still remember there'd be 500 or 800 or 1,000 people at these events, and yet I would still feel so damn lonely, even though I was surrounded by all of this stuff. Yet in regional Australia, my experience with Townsville, because your community is so much smaller, you value that contact so much more. So the things you would not normally accept from individuals in capital cities, because it's so easy to brush your hand and move on to the next person, you accept a lot more. So you get a whole experience. You learn to live with people's foibles and accept them as part of the course. You become more accepting for people that you would normally fit into your lot in life. And you also reach out to those that need assistance and help because they're more visible. They stand out more than what they do in the capital cities. I think one of the main advantages for me is the lifestyle in regional and rural Australia is a little more relaxed. It's a little more chance to take a breather. And as a result of that, you get the opportunity to think a little more. I found living in the capital cities and the feedback I've got from friends is it can be a bit claustrophobic 24/7. The sacrifices are, well, in Townsville, if you're horny, you don't always necessarily get laid. In a capital city, you have that at your fingertips 24/7 and multiple choices. So when you're like me and you do manage to find a hookup or a partner, you value it. It means something. But that's from a male perspective. I'm unsure whether it's the same for our women's community, for our lesbian community, but I do know in Townsville, our communities are very tight. You know, the guys and the girls mix really well together, where my experience in the capital cities, they're a bit more segregated and separated. And so I appreciate the B's and the T's and the I's and the G's and everybody else in the alphabet that's a part of who we identify as much as I do appreciate people with a penis, for example.
Absolutely, definitely. Siobhan, you were saying that you met your, how did you meet your wife? And was that while you were living out there? Or if that's something you want to talk about, feel free to say no.
It's a bit of a funny story, actually. We were talking about this on the car ride home. I said, I bet this comes up. And she goes, yeah, I'm going to laugh when it does. So I hope she's listening because here it goes. But I was living up here. However, we did not meet here. I was actually laying in my bed at my parents' house scrolling through good old Tinder at the time. So yeah, good old Roxby Downs isn't so great for the gay scene, but it's when you go back to Adelaide, as you said, you've got all the pickings in the world. I just happened to find one that I quite fancied, and here we are. But it's funny, like you said something there, Colin, that sort of triggered something. Like from the perspective of just being yourself, like the town that I live in is small, right? So you work with your neighbor. You know, I can tell you where they sit at work. And everyone knows everyone. You pretty much know everyone's story. And if you're not willing to bring your whole self to work, then you can't say anything anywhere. You know, if you weren't comfortable showing who you were at work, you probably wouldn't be known, going to Woolworths with your partner if no one knew. Purely because you cannot hide. There's nowhere to hide. And as an example, I love using his example because it's much better than anything I've got, is the beautiful Dwayne Mullins, who you may or may not have heard of. So Dwayne is basically, I've turned him into the BHP OD poster boy, which I think he's lapping up very well. So Dwayne was actually nominated as a finalist for the Out Role Model of the Year with AWEI. And so he was invited to the Hyatt in Sydney yesterday for the award ceremony. Unfortunately, just got snapped up by Kathy from the Australian Federal Police, but good win nonetheless. And so Dwayne spent 13 years working underground before he came out. And whilst he lives in fly in, fly out commuted from Melbourne and Sydney, he has spent a fair chunk of his life and working career here underground with a team that knew nothing about his personal life. So his beautiful partner was definitely left in the lurch, but it was for what Dwayne thought was his safety and for the safety of his job. And then for a bit more perspective, Dwayne is a jumbo operator. So he is one of the most well-paid operators underground on the site. And the reason they're so well paid is because what they do is probably hands down the thing that would kill you underground.
Yeah.
So they're big jumbo rigs, 2 big drills that go straight into a rock face, and you are a meter away from that rock face. You hit something wrong, that thing is crumbling towards you and you are under it. So they're paid danger money, but they're all highly skilled operators that take years and years of training to get to that point. So very well respected man. He's a relief supervisor. You look at him and he's just the most beautiful person. And he was scared to come out. And that right there is the prime example of why Jasper became so important to BHP and even just the town in general. Because someone who's been in this community for 13 years was too scared to be happy to be themselves at work.
I remember for years that people would not call you by your name. When people would refer to me as, the gay guy, the fag, and the amount of time that you would have been reduced to, she's the lesbian, and so you lost your identity because of your sexuality. And I think now the changes are, like you said, the company's embraced him, he's done very well. Yeah. Those days of being identified and reduced to our sexuality, I think, have disappeared a little bit. Nita, I'm kind of interested in your story. When you were elected, were you Senator Green, or behind the scenes were people referring to you as the lesbian senator? Because you would catch this. It wouldn't often be done to your face, but it would always be done behind the scenes, and then you'd have to climb over it and make it not an issue and make it wrong,
Yeah, I'm really lucky, Colin. I'm part of a party with a very proud tradition of supporting LGBTI candidates, and we already have some gay senators, and they've been there for a long time. So I wasn't the first. I think if I was, it might have been a bit different. And Rainbow Labor is a community organisation within the Labor Party, and they do a really good job of supporting people who are running for office and just being inclusive within the party itself, but also progressing policy issues through the party. So no, I don't think people refer to me in that way. And there's a really important distinction that I want to make, and we're getting a little bit off topic, James, but some people will say, I don't want to be known as the gay senator or the gay politician because there's so many other things that are important to me or that I stand for. And that is true, that that was a catalyst for me to get more involved. But the bedrock of the reason that I'm even involved in the Labor Party in the first place is that my mum is a nurse. We grew up in a situation where family violence was part of our upbringing. there are so many social issues that drew me to politics before marriage equality was even a campaign worth fighting for. So for me, there's a lot of issues that I'm really proud to stand up for, whether it's workplace rights or the need to have a better, more secure jobs for people in regional Queensland. So I don't want to necessarily be known as the gay senator, but I don't really think that you should say it's not important to me, because it absolutely is. It is absolutely important to be, and everyone's decision is personal. But for me, I'm never going to shy away from it in the sense of saying, oh, that's not really who I am. It's 100% who I am. And if I didn't get involved in the marriage equality campaign, people wouldn't have seen me out and about and talking to people and campaigning and working. So they wouldn't have thought, oh, this person might have what it takes. So I certainly think that we need to make sure that we understand that there's more than one dimension to people who are in politics. There's lots of gay politicians who are very conservative and have conservative views. So just necessarily being gay doesn't mean you are progressive. You need to understand that people have views not necessarily based on their sexuality, but based on lots of other factors. But at the same time, I don't really mind being known as a lesbian senator in some circles. I think it's pretty cool. I just know that there are so many other things that are, I want Australia and I want Queensland to learn about me and about my story and about what I stand up for. And that's just one part of it.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
you're 100% right there, Nita. One little point that I wanted to make after what you said, if your primary life force and driving energy is your sexuality, you live for your sexuality, and there's a lot of gay people that do, it's their primary driving force in their life, well then moving to rural and regional Australia will be a little more difficult for you, because everything that you desire in your life won't be as laid on as in the protection of the ghettos. However, if you're a person who happens to be gay and you're on a career path, or you're living for family, or you've got some dreams and aspirations, and your sexuality is simply a part of that, you're going to have the biggest opportunity of success, because you're more isolated when you're regionally and rural. My experience was, as I decided to become public and stand up, the biggest attacks I got came from within the GLBTI community itself. People were telling me to shut up, to be quiet, stop drawing attention to us. If nobody notices us, we don't get hurt. But at some point you have to stand, you have to claim your space, you have to state what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and that you're not going to move. And then the wider community, then it's like Moses parting the sea, sort of, you know, mainstream society starts to begrudgingly starts to make room for you. And then they embrace you because of what you can bring to your community and the things that you can add. So as a gay man, there was a tough time in making my bed, but now it's so much easier to sleep in it, and I do so proudly. Gone are the days when I would be in a backyard barbecue in suburbia where I would have to stand up because some inappropriate heterosexual would make some inappropriate gay joke or fag remark or whatever, and I would have to stand up by myself and say that's unacceptable. Now, before I get the opportunity to do so, 80% of the other heterosexuals at that backyard barbecue were standing up on my behalf and saying, hey, you wouldn't know what you're talking about. And to me, that's a success of living in regional communities. Now, that's why I think what Nita was talking about, particularly the family background, mum being a nurse, working class people, a political party that was prepared to embrace you, and also giving you the opportunity for your particular voice to be heard is so important. I remember when Four Corners did a documentary on Townsville called Hitting Material, where we were having carfuls of people coming in with baseball bats and attempted murders and stabbings and bashings. Once that became public, mainstream Townsville society was shocked that they were being seen by the country as being that type of people. So sometimes being that voice, like Siobhan with BHP, like Nita in the Senate, and James yourself with tech and with small business, it might not seem much to you as an individual at the time, but in 25 and 30 years' time, what we're doing now will make a safe and wonderful existence for those to follow, whether you choose to be in a ghetto or live on the land, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think 100%, I entirely agree on that. Even something, and you can say, we've had trailblazers like you doing it for 30 years, but we can see it even in like the much shorter periods. Like you've said, Siobhan, you've done it over the last couple of years. I've only been in Townsville for like the last decade. And I remember that when I opened my business with my husband, who was at the time just my boyfriend, at the time, people said, like, and you said within the gay community, people said, don't even try it. Like, you cannot be gay and own a business in this town. And it was, for us, it was something that was important. We decided, well, we're not going to, like you said, with that gentleman who had to hide an entire section of his life for how many years? We lived together, we worked together. I was like, that's not something that I can just hide. Like, it's not the kind of thing which I was prepared to live a half-life. And even in that 10 years time, the world is so vastly different. Like, and it's not just marriage equality, it's the communities themselves. Nita would know that with the equality campaign, Townsville had one of the higher rates that voted yes. We had more than 66%, so just slightly, but that's a fantastic rate.
You did do what, a market stall every Saturday for like 6 months, so that might have had something to do with it.
And it was the kind of thing which I was nowhere near comfortable doing. It was something that, but it was my community. These are the people that I see every day. And it was so great to kind of immerse myself in that and actually be able to like shake the hands of people who said, hey, I don't care how you live your life. Like, I don't know why the government's trying to do anything. I stand with you. And that kind of thing sticks with you in a community. It's the kind of thing where I can walk around and see those people every day. And I'm like, oh, these are the people who, when push came to shove, they had my back. So I thought that was really, really cool and really important, definitely.
And there's heaps of stories in history about it. I remember the long head, I forget his name, the gay farmer who went on Big Brother. Remember when that's exactly right. And people get surprised when they realise that the first AIDS Council organisation in Australia was set up in Townsville in late 1984. We were the first AIDS organisation in Australia to be bombed, happened here in Townsville. You know, Townsville led the way in Queensland for the Police Gay and Lesbian Liaison Unit. Finally, they were collecting statistics on violence against members of the gay community, because if you didn't know it was a problem, you couldn't change the law. So it was regional and rural Queensland that got out and changed that. And of course, Cairns, I remember with Cairns, when Turtle Cove opened, Australia's first gay and lesbian resort. And I remember the attacks were not because it was a gay and lesbian resort, because it was the only commercial property in Australia that had ownership of their beach. They owned the beach that they're on because Joe Bjelke-Petersen gave a special arrangement to a Japanese developer, and it ended up being owned by the gay community, as we do really well. We'll take over. And of course, it's still going today. So regional and rural Australia has led the gay fight for equality in many different ways that have not only helped the urban gay centres, but have given a real voice. You know, I think the success of the change of gay laws shows the most in the rural aspects of our community, where you haven't got the ghettos and all the groups and organisations and the bars and the clubs and so on. The success of all the work that's done by those prior to us shows on the success and the safety, as Nita brought up, with the life of those people living in rural Australia now. So they can walk and talk and stand tall and proud, and they might not have everything at their fingertips, but they know there's a place for them, and they know there's people out there that can help. They know that the government agencies are now much more trained in our issues, whether it be state issues of police or health or education, or national issues like immigration, or having your voices heard, such as the long-winded marriage equality debate, or whether it's really important things that we're now start going to face more often, like adoption and surrogacy and end-of-life issues. And it still amazes me now that, you know, gay couples, when they retire, still find it really tough to be able to share a room in a retirement home. You know, they're the new things that we're going to start arguing for. And it's people that, like us, who have stood up in our local communities, that it doesn't surprise me about the Townsville Gay Equality vote, you know, because our AIDS Council was bombed. You know, it meant that the local community here were forced to face the issues of sexuality a little bit more seriously. And our civic leaders and everybody didn't want those type of reputations. So, but it took those people to stand up, you know, it took the Nitas and so on. And the complexities that Siobhan has, she could be grabbed by BHP and ordered to transfer to somewhere else, you know, at short notice. And you've got to drag your family, and you don't know for how long. Townsville's a big military city, so we have lots of defence members who are GLBTI that never know where they're going to end up one year for another, and are separated for long periods of time. You know, we have our own issues that make us successful in how we deal with those, more so than fear and insecurity. And I think now that our parliaments are much more educated, and now that the average GLBTI person is now much more comfortable in standing up, therefore working on the land, or working for the mines, or being FIFO, or running for the Senate, or standing in positions of power and influence that doesn't involve cooking, hospitality, hairdressing, or truck driving, if you happen to be a lesbian. Those things we're no longer stereotyped with, and we can be anything to anybody and be successful in doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're running on time, coming up to the end now. I don't see any questions that have come in, but I did have a question that I wanted to kind of end on with everyone. If you had, we've got two main audiences that we want to talk to tonight. We're talking to people who live in the metro centres, who have no idea what it's like living in the regions. And we have the regional gays who are looking at metro centres as their only escape. So if you have one thing to say to either or both of those groups before we go, what would that be? I'll start with you, Nita. Or do you need time to think?
No, that's fine. It's just interesting because I think I was sort of thinking before that actually this year, 2020, has changed a lot of assumptions, and a lot of people will be reconsidering where they're living, what they're doing, what their future looks like. And a lot of people in Australia are doing it really tough right now. There are a lot of people who will need to make a decision about moving somewhere for a new job. I did that after the GFC. I lost my job, I got made redundant, and I moved to Canberra, of all places, to get a permanent job. So I would like to talk to those people who are living in cities and encourage them to move to regional areas. I know a lot of people are thinking about doing that because coronavirus has sort of shown us well, I guess it would be nice to maybe have a bit of extra room, maybe a backyard. Wouldn't it be nice to have a bit more, places to go and to see and to be closer to the places that people want to go on holidays to? But also that different lifestyle and the opportunities that you can have in regional areas. We do have high unemployment rates in Townsville and Cairns at the moment, but there will be opportunities, and there are opportunities in this recovery effort to come and to live here. And one of the terms that the government's using around this is regionalisation rather than decentralisation. It's about encouraging people to come and live in regional areas, because if our regions don't recover, we won't be able to recover at all. So I would strongly encourage people to consider moving if they've got that time in their life now where they're rethinking everything and they need to start fresh. Please come and go. Please come and live in regional Australia. We need you. We need you so we can rebuild. There are going to be a lot of investment going into places in regional areas, and so there will be jobs here, and there is a community here for you if you want to find it. At the moment, a lot of the community is online and it is social media, and that can feel a little bit isolating because there's nothing like being in, at the moment we're not really meant to be dancing in crowds. I mean, try to tell a gay club you can't dance. I mean, that's but we're going to observe all of the things that the Premier has said, because we don't want to jump the gun on this health response.
That's right.
But there are communities, there are clubs, there are groups. There's soccer clubs. There's online groups that you can get involved in when you move to a regional area, because all of the things that you might think about feeling isolated and not belonging, coronavirus has sort of shown us that you can live a little further away from your family and still feel that connection. It won't be quite the same as the hug that you're used to getting, but certainly there are places in regional Australia for you to live, for you to work, and for you to feel part of a community and to feel included. We're all here and we're waiting for you to join us.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much, Nita. Siobhan, what do you have to say to one or either of those groups?
I think I come from such a different perspective, in the sense that I'm, obviously I'm in a small town, a service town. So, I live here with a complete purpose of work. I live in a house that's owned by the company. Like my whole life is dictated by my job. And the one thing that isn't dictated by my job is my partner and my fur family, who, I'm sorry, the cat is clingy as anything, but at least she's left me alone for 5 minutes. But, as much as it's a small town, it's a young community, it's a vibrant community. Even with work, we've got some blokes that have been on site for 40 years. And you would think that they'd be the first people to turn around and sort of snob you off. But they're not. They're usually the people that they ask questions, and they'll come up to you and they go, look, I don't know if this is the right thing to ask, but is it okay if I call you a gay person? Or is that inappropriate? I'm like, I don't care what you call me. You call me Sue if you want. I really don't mind. But, it's they ask from a place of honest unknown. And I had a manager come up and say to me the first time that she met me, she goes, I know what it's like to be a woman in mining, but I don't know what it's like to be a gay woman in mining. And I think that's resonated with me for a while, because you don't know unless you are that person. But you don't know unless you ask either. Yeah. So, it's all about asking and communicating and talking, and the more we talk about it, particularly up here, the more comfortable people get with it. And it's the same as being just being within the community. The more you reach out to people who are just not sure, the happier they become.
Yeah, the more enriched the community becomes. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. No, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Colin, what do you have to say to people who, in your terms, are living in the gay ghettos, or or the metro areas, or to the people in regional and rural Australia who are considering leaving?
I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I'm going to say, in my experience, GLBTI people, we can achieve absolutely any damn thing we set our mind to. No barrier can be put up before us that we cannot conquer ourselves and with our friends. If you're thinking of moving to regional Australia or rural Australia, there will be a gay element within the community you choose somehow, somewhere, by some means. It's just a matter of you connecting with it and finding it. And I can tell you this, they want to find you just as much as you want to find them. They're just as keen for you to become a part of their community as you want to become a part of theirs. Leaving the rural and regional communities and going to the big city, that's okay too. Career paths, jobs, family, health, education, or even just more opportunities, that's fine or dandy too. There are no restrictions as a gay or lesbian person about how we want to live our lives or where we want to live them. There is a way that it can be made possible. I'm not aware of anywhere in this wide brown country of ours where you can go and they shut the door to you, where you have no opportunity, where you have no prevalence or no sense of self-worth. It's a matter of identifying the sacrifices you're prepared to make for your life against the opportunities you want. If you want to dance all night, that's fine. Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Byron Bay. There are some amazing places outside of the capital cities where you can live. If you want to get stuck down into your career because you work for the public service or you're a big multinational worker such as Siobhan or Department of Defence, you can be transferred anywhere. There are communities that'll make you welcome. If you get into a jam, if you have a problem, if your life's threatened, if your health is in danger, there are elements within those regional and rural communities that are going to be able to back you up. They might be a little harder to find, but they do exist. So don't be afraid to reach out, take the plunge. And you know, the most important thing is believe in yourself, because you can achieve absolutely anything. And all four of us here today are prime examples that that's the case. So take the plunge, whatever the choice is. You want to go big smoke, do it. You want to go little smoke, do it. You don't want to have any smoke, well, do that too. You know, that's okay. But just believe in it and back yourself up and be prepared to reach out, because there are people there that will grab your hand, I promise.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate everyone's time tonight. I think we've achieved exactly, at least the starting points for discussion. As I said, regional queer Australia is quiet. It's small and it's quiet, and there are pockets all over Australia. But we found, especially with COVID, that digital communication and connection is really, really successful. I think we're kind of entering a new era where we're able to kind of expand on that, and together, I think regional queer Australia will be able to have a much louder voice and be able to talk about the issues that affect us going forward. So I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, everyone. All of the participants who have joined, everyone who has attended, at the end, you'll be sent a quick survey just about the event tonight that'll just ask your opinion, because at the end of the day, that's what OFA is all about, is finding what it is that people took away from these kind of events. So just making sure that we're able to provide, the best information possible going forward. All right. Thank you very much, guys.
You're welcome.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, was that all right? Yeah, very good. Good. Okay. Good. So were there comments? Did people